Welcome back to Holistic Healing Association. I'd like to welcome back Marija. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you for having me. Great to be back here talking to you.
Today we are going to be talking about relationships and how to have a healthy relationship when you do not have a healthy blueprint growing up. And Marija, would you like to go ahead and get started and tell us a little bit about relationships?
Yeah, well, I think it will be interesting too, because I know we talked before about kind of our personal histories and how I think it's really interesting how different our stories are. And I wonder if maybe it will be good to first talk about conflict and how that played out in both of our histories, because I think a lot of people might relate with your story and a lot of people might relate with mine. And I think maybe it will be interesting to start talking and discussing that. So maybe you want to start with just a little bit talking about how you were growing up and how like that affected you and your relationship with conflict, and then I will talk about mine, and then we can sort of bounce back and forth and discuss that.
Okay, sounds good. So growing up and today, my parents, I can say, had one of or the best relationships I know. They're best friends. They're in their early 70s. I'll be at their house and they're say, time to go home, Erin. We want to be alone. They just absolutely love each other. They date, they're best friends.
Nice.
However, growing up, I never really saw them argue or fight. And that meant I never really saw them repair. Because if they fought, they argued, there was behind our backs. And when they argued, it was very, very rare. I don't recall one time my parents were arguing. And they have never called each other a name, and they've been married for 47 years. And I had to have some really close friends in my adulthood realized I did not really know how to handle conflict. I just wouldn't say anything. I would just kind of go silent. And then I'm the person who always talks to everybody all the time. And when I go silent, they're like, wait, something's up. And they had to keep on asking me, what's wrong, Erin? What's wrong? And I'd be like, there's nothing wrong. I'm fine. I'm good. And they would be like, no, what's wrong? You know, something's up. And I'd be like, no, nothing's wrong. Everything's good. And they had to keep on pushing me, and then I'd probably speak up. And they kind of taught me that when something's wrong, to speak up. Now, saying that, growing up, I definitely, if you were to ask my parents, I definitely would argue with them.
Okay.
Yes, I definitely tested my boundaries and I would argue with them. And I was a typical child. So I don't want to say there was absolutely no conflict in the house, because there definitely was. And I was the one causing it. But to see adults repair our conflict was almost non-existent for me. And even today, that's something I'm working through, is learning how to handle conflict, because conflict and arguments, I definitely do not feel comfortable in my body.
Interesting. How do you feel, like, if you remember, just kind of a follow-up question to that, do you remember when you were, as you say, starting up conflict and arguments with your parents as a child, do you remember how they were responding to you at all? Like,
Yes,
how
definitely.
did they handle it?
I was
What
always
was happening?
grounded. I was grounded all the time. I would give them a dirty look and I'd be grounded. I'd give them another dirty look and I'd be grounded. I never swore. Like, there was no yelling. I would just maybe talk back, and I was always grounded. So I may have also learned to repress my anger, because every time I showed it, I got grounded. I mean, it's very important to respect your parents, but it's also important to be able to release anger in a healthy way. And joining Embodied processing, I had someone tell me the way I handled sports, there was anger. because what I would do is I played some rugby, I played hockey, I played ringette, and I was the smallest person on the team normally. And my ringette coach called me the beast. And there's another girl called the butterfly. And she was graceful and beautiful on the ice. I was not. I was the beast. I would go against the biggest players on the ice and I'd go full out at them. In gym class for rugby, I got 99% because I would literally fly in the air at the girls and tackle them down. And I loved it. And then I started having a few other somatic practitioners say, well, Erin, that was anger. And I'm like, no, it's not. I'm like, that's not anger. I was not angry at these people. I'm like, you girls just don't understand sports. I'm like, I'm just being competitive here. And then I started to learn more. And I was like, you're right. I was not angry, but I was in full out fight mode.
Yeah,
and that's probably how I started to release anger is through these sports. I would be going hard against the boards. I'd be flying at people in rugby and having a lot of fun. So that's probably how I started to release it.
Nice, nice. Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. I really resonate with that. The ability to process anger, not directly, but indirectly through the body. Yeah. And it's actually one of the healthiest ways to process anger through movement. You were just doing it unconsciously. So that's really interesting. Yeah, yeah. That's really interesting. That's really fascinating. And the reason I like to kind of to hear your story as well is because my story of growing up is like the exact opposite, to start from the fact that I didn't have a father, obviously. But I was raised by my mom and my grandmother and my older sister, and we had conflict in the house every day. Like, I'm not kidding. I'm not exaggerating. It was every single day in the small ways, in big ways, fights, shouting. And it's interesting because, you say I didn't see any conflict growing up, and so now I don't know how to handle it. I saw it every day and I still don't know how to handle it because the way I watched it was really unhealthy. So it's like those two extremes of like not seeing anything at all for you and seeing way too much for me. And really the middle, the golden center is being able to witness it, and being able to witness not just the conflict but also the resolution, the repair. And neither of us saw that.
And
And I
think the
think that's
repair is huge to see the repair happen. Right. And
yeah,
just really like with children, with my daughter, if anything happens, not conflict, but like if she gets hurt or she's feeling sad, and this is with any child, it's so important to do the repair. That's the critical part because this is what will create a very resilient person.
yeah, absolutely. I agree. And also what I can say is that now in my relationships, what I've noticed, and it's like such a crazy thing when I think about it, but I've noticed my bodily reaction when I actually make up with my partner. Like when we have an argument and then he agrees, or I'm like, oh yeah, like we find resolution and we repair, my body is like freaked out by that. And that's been such an interesting thing to witness, that even though this is a good thing that's happening right now, my body doesn't like it because I never saw it. That wasn't normal. And because in my family, arguments happen and then things just swept under the rug, and they're never dealt with and until the next argument, So I think that's really, really interesting because that's such a huge part of actually having a healthy relationship blueprint. Because I mean, I think with your parents, like they're so lucky that they found such huge compatibility, clearly, right? If they rarely argued, if ever, and they still love each other after almost 50 years, like that shows that they're clearly very compatible people. But
I
for
think it's more than
majority,
being compatible though, because I think,
for sure,
yeah, I think like, I mean, it obviously takes a lot of work too, but yeah, there's a lot of factors when it comes to relationships, right? Being
yeah.
compatible 100% will make a difference, but
Mm,
it's also picking someone who's going to show you total respect and kindness and has
yeah.
a lot of strong moral ethics. with how to treat other people and that are honest and kind.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think also if you are more compatible, it's easier to do those things.
100%.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
And I think like what I was, I guess, trying to say is that when you are not like really, really compatible, you're going to have naturally differences, and you need to be able to talk about them, and you need to be able to find common ground. And that's where I feel most people struggle with, because that in itself can create conflict, because conflict doesn't have to mean arguments. Conflict can simply mean saying, I disagree, or I didn't like that, or something you did hurt me. And it doesn't have to escalate into a fight, but because people don't have that communication skill, and they don't know how to handle this like arousal of like energy of maybe a bit of fight and a bit of flight, they don't know how to sit with that in the body. I think that's when communication goes like askew, and people end up in conflicts. And that's where I feel most relationships start to crack, because then the trust gets broken, and people say things that they don't really want to say, but they're saying it because it just comes out of them in that, from that fight place. So that's what I think. But yeah, that's what I think about like the conflict side of things, and why so many people struggle. And that's such a huge component when people grow up not in it's witnessing a healthy dynamic within parents. And that repair, as you say, I think that's a really big thing for people who struggle in relationships as adults.
And I think it's also really important to learn to respect the other person's differences. And really in conflict, when we're angry, how often do you think you're right? Right? Almost all the time. So it's really learning to listen to the other person. And what I've been trying to learn, as I said, we started a journey to really start to feel the other person's emotions. Because when we can feel the other person's emotions, it can cause empathy and a deeper understanding for the other person. And I think doing this can also help us with conflict, because if we can really listen to the other person and understand, then we're able to see the other person's perspective.
Yeah, yeah. And I absolutely. And what comes to mind is there's this quote that I always remind myself, like especially in times of conflict: listen to understand, not to respond. Because people most of the time, especially when they're heated already, the argument is already heated and they're already aroused, they will be listening to counterattack. They're listening, like, what's the next thing that you're going to say? I've got something against you. It's like that. I want to be right. But if you're listening from, as you say, that empathetic, compassionate place where you're trying to feel what other person is feeling, you will be listening to them to get to know them more. Okay, you're saying that something I'm doing has upset you, or you don't like that. Tell me more, rather than, you don't like me, you're always telling me, criticizing me all the time. Like that's counterattack, right? It's defense mode, and it's just all going to not in a good direction. But if you're really trying to understand the other person and where their pain point is, in order to resolve it in one way or another, like that's when you're really listening with that empathy and those empathetic ears, and you're like, oh, I really want to understand your inner workings here.
And I believe that's one of the major reasons why people separate, is because we are way too defensive, or we can be too defensive. And so learning to really listen and embody our own emotions and learn to feel other people's emotions, it will create a deeper understanding of ourselves and our spouses, our partners, our friends, our family.
Yeah.
And that should create more peace, because of course conflict is going to happen. It's not preventable, right? But just learning to really listen and not always needing to speak. That's something I'm trying to work on. I like to talk a lot.
Me too.
And just really learning to listen and hear what the other person is saying for a deeper understanding. And then, yes, respecting people. Like I know, for example, for my parents, one's Catholic and one's Protestant. And they have been married for 47 years, like I said, and they still go to separate churches. And they go every week, and they have different beliefs.
That's amazing.
but they're strong in their faith and they respect each other's differences and they go to different churches. But they don't get in arguments about it, right? It's something they decide just they're not going to talk about.
Yeah. That's so cool because I hear this all the time nowadays. I think people have become a lot more, I don't know if they've become or they've always been like that, but I know that a lot of people are quite superficial in that regard, where they can say, literally to the point where they say, oh, he doesn't like to read the same books as I do, so we're not compatible, and so I'm not going to be in a relationship with them. To say that two people are from different religions and they still love each other, that's a huge thing. And to be able to work through that and you say respect each other for it. And I think one of the things why, because I had that problem as well, where I was not flexible enough. I think my nervous system wasn't flexible enough to deal with difference. And I think that's something that a lot of people with trauma actually struggle with, because there is a rigidity to like a view of another person or of a relationship. And it's like, if it's not this way, then clearly it's bad and this is not the right relationship. And you get into that sort of black and white thinking. Whereas when you're more flexible and your nervous system is more flexible, you can allow for more differences and more discussion. And, at some point you might say, actually, the differences that we have aren't good enough. Like, they're quite big and maybe we shouldn't be together. And that's fine. But I feel like most people don't even get to that point. They just say, well, it's not the way I want it, so cut. That's it. And I actually think that's got something to do with that nervous system flexibility.
It makes a lot of sense because we
Mm,
react a lot with our nervous system and not in our ventral vagal, right? And when we are reacting, we're not always thinking clearly, right? We're just
yeah.
reacting.
Yeah,
And that
yeah,
can also have a huge impact on our relationships, and not just marriage or if you have a partner, but with family and with friends and with clients, and the list can go on. And that's why it's so important that we learn to have healthy relationships. And in relationships, yes, relationships can cause us to have trauma
mm-hmm.
for sure, 100% it can. But in relationships is where we heal.
Yeah,
And sometimes when we have trauma, we feel like we want to heal alone. And that can be at times nearly impossible. It,
yeah,
it takes community, it takes relationships to heal.
yeah, yeah. I mean, in terms of developmental relational trauma, all of it, 100% of it comes from relationships, right? That's how we get traumatized. I mean, unless we're talking about things like car accidents, war, really big things like that, every other trauma comes from within relationships, where trust is broken or we experience shame or some kind of boundary violation. Like it's all from other people, right? And yes, it's right, as you say, we can't heal that alone, because if it was caused within dynamic between two people, it has to be healed within dynamic. Because, and I've seen that so many times actually, where people, they experience trauma and then they have years outside of relationships, so they stay single for years and they feel happy and
It was
like, oh my
me.
gosh, my life is, yeah, and then it's like my life is so great, and then they end up in a relationship and all hell breaks loose. It's crazy how much they get put back into that trauma cycle, and they were like, I didn't know that was still there. And that's because nothing was there to shine those lights on the cracks that were still in place.
That's
um
true. Because when we're in relationships, especially close relationships, that's when our traumas can be magnified, because that's when we're more likely to be triggered. And the
yeah,
closer we are with the person, the more we're likely we are to be triggered by them because we care, right? If we didn't
yeah.
care, they wouldn't affect us the same.
Absolutely, yeah. And I know so many people that are great business owners, and they can manage teams, and they're so successful in all these other areas of their lives, and then they're like, I have all of this stuff, but then I struggle with relationships, because it's like a whole different ball game. You can't logically think through relationships entirely. You have to be emotionally available for that. And if you open yourself for emotions, open yourself up for emotions, you're opening up every emotion. And of course all the traumatic stuff will be there too. And that's why people struggle so much within relationships more than anything else.
And that
I
can be
think.
really
And
scary to people to open up. because even to feel emotions, that can be really scary to feel for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because they're
Yeah.
scared because they know there's a lot of under in the body, right? Like I know when I started to feel in my body, I was like, ooh, I was like, I didn't know I was down there, right? And then I kept ignoring my head because I'm like, I don't have to feel it. I'm in my head subconsciously. Of course, it's not like you're doing it on purpose, but keep on going in your body, starting to heal, starting to feel, because when we don't feel it and we just resist it, it becomes louder. And that can
Yeah.
cause to a whole chronic health problems, anxiety, depression, the list goes on.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And like talking about that flexibility aspect and respecting each other, what I've noticed, I had this pattern of, I don't know why that happens to people, but it's like I believed subconsciously that everyone thinks like me. Like it's like everyone thinks like me. And so if they're saying something that I read as they don't care, they don't love me, then that is true. And the more I talked to like my partner, for example, like he was like the best teacher for me in that way, because he's patient enough to like sit and talk through this stuff. I know a lot of people are not. And when I would have these triggers come up because of something he would do or say, and I was able to like calm down enough to talk about it, and then he would tell me why he's acting in that way, and I would understand it's like completely not what I thought it was, the reasons why he was acting this way or saying these words. And it was like entirely different. It's like something was shifting in my brain where I'm like, oh, I can look at this problem from a completely different angle, and that's how he's looking at it, and I didn't know that side existed. It's like something shifts in your brain where you start to see worlds in such a 2D way, where it's like it's just my perspective and that's it. And that's what I think a lot of people also struggle with, because they don't see that another person might be coming from a completely different place. And it's actually a skill that you have to develop to be able to see that. And that's when, again, you can be more respectful and be more curious with your partner. And curiosity is
Curiosity.
such a big thing. Yeah, it's a
Curiosity. Yeah.
huge. Yeah. For
And
healing trauma, it's huge.
also like in learning to see different perspectives, right? Like you
Yeah.
just said, like your partner will sit you down and explain his perspective. And then it helps. And that's if we can all learn to see multiple perspectives. Because I believe a lot of the time if someone's doing something, it's not because they're trying to be mean. It's just a completely different perspective, right? And we can take it personal. We can take it that the person's trying to be mean or harmful or hurtful to us. But if we really learn to listen and understand, this is the first step to healing. And this is also will help us start to understand other people, but maybe
Yeah.
even ourselves a little bit more.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, and I was just going to also say about intimacy, because it's such a big part of all of that as well, where, if we have trauma and we have emotional walls from the past, that literally blocks intimacy, because I've heard that phrase before, that intimacy is into me see, like see into me. And if we don't let people in, if we don't want to be vulnerable and we don't want to listen and we don't want to understand and be curious, that is literally the opposite of intimacy, because intimacy requires us to be open and let people into the deepest parts of ourselves, which can be so vulnerable and so scary. And of course, with people who have experienced betrayal, experienced trauma, experienced mistrust, that can be the scariest thing. And so I think it's important, like in terms of the topic we're talking about, like how to have a healthy relationship. Conflict is one thing, but on the other side, it's like, don't do that, like don't do unhealthy conflict, but also we have to do the healthy stuff, which is building intimacy. It's like saying, I don't smoke, so I'm healthy. Like that doesn't work. Yes, it's great that you don't smoke, but you also have to do sport and eat healthily and go outside. It's like you have to do stuff, not just not do stuff. And so
Yes, get enough
intimacy is
sleep.
one of those things. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And it's like that with relationships. Yes, if you're not having toxic arguments, great. But what are you doing to have a healthy relationship? And intimacy is one of those things where you have to be willing to be emotionally open. And the other person has to be willing to be respectful and be curious. And that's how it all gets built. And then you have so much connection with the person.
And we need to also be able to receive it. Because
Yeah.
sometimes when we have trauma, we're not able to receive it. And when someone's trying to give it to us, it's like, whoa, what are you doing? Too much. I don't trust it. Right? It's
True.
overwhelming. And that alone can trigger some people.
Yeah.
And so I find at times when we have trauma, um, it's like struggling to trust people, right?
Yeah.
Because some people have been so badly hurt, it's like I don't want to be hurt again,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to trust anybody, right? Like I know once, when I was in my early 20s, a guy grabbed me around my throat, and that was one of my first dating relationships, and I couldn't breathe. So I didn't date for years because I didn't trust men. And even the relationships I entered, I didn't let them in because I was like, I mean, I dated them, we got along, but I didn't really let them in because I'm like, I'm not going to trust you. I'm not going to let my guard down or my wall or my emotional armor.
Yeah.
And I do a ton of sessions on people, and this is something that's very, very common. Or you can be at the opposite spectrum, which in many aspects of my life I have been. Once I was in New York City with my best friend, and a group of strangers were talking to us, and I thought it was great. I love talking to people. And my best friend kept on saying, we gotta go, we gotta go. We're gonna be late for the subway. And I was like, what are you talking about? We have lots of time. We have a half an
She was
hour. She's
more
like,
she was more street aware.
much more. And I was like, she told me like 3 times. And finally she's like, Erin, we have to go right now. I was like, okay. So we went, and I'm like, it's not even here. I'm like, I was enjoying talking to them. She's like, Erin, did you not see they were all sitting separate? Yet they all knew each other. They were going to rob us. I had no clue. So it's also like learning red flags, but also learning when you're safe and when you're not safe.
Yeah, and it's really hard. And yeah, it's that's crazy. And I remember, like, I think we experience that mostly as children and young people, because that's when we're learning, right? Because we come into the world very trusting, and I think that's the way it should be. And then that trust gets broken, and we learn that discernment. Where is the safety and where is the danger? And unfortunately, sometimes we learn it too late. And that's how people end up in toxic relationships and abuse and things like that, because we don't recognize the signs. And I can say that I was in an abusive relationship. My first one was abusive. And because I had no experience, first of all, of growing up, I had no men at home. I didn't know what it felt like to actually be in a relationship with a man, or didn't see it. So when I ended up in an abusive relationship, I genuinely thought that that's how everyone lived. Like, I thought that that was a life of a woman, the way I was treated. I thought that was the norm. And now, like, when I got out of that relationship, and I was able to see the red flags, it was like, okay, that's like my ex, I'm not going to go into that. And obviously the other side of this is when you get hurt a lot, like, if in your case, like, if your trust gets broken and you get betrayed and hurt many times, like, that's where self-sabotage can come in, where actually good people come in to the picture, and they actually are trustworthy, but your nervous system is wired to now be hypervigilant, and it's like, oh, when are they going to betray me? When is the next time going to come that I'm going to get betrayed? And so we can actually start to sabotage that relationship, even though it's perfectly fine, because we are so scared that it's going to happen again. And that's, I think, one of the hardest things to actually see. Like, that's, I think, where, having a relationship therapist or a coach is actually so helpful, because you sometimes literally need a third person to be like, you're safe, because you can't see it yourself. And I think that's where, like, the sabotage comes in for people, where they have experienced so much bad stuff that when good stuff is there, they don't trust it. They're like, where's the pothole? Like, where is it going to crack?
And what would be the red flags and what would be the green flags? Green flags meaning go ahead, this is safe, this is positive, move forward. And then the red flags, danger, 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 stop.
Yeah,
Because I think
yeah.
learning those and then learning to embody them, learning them up here and down here will make a difference. And what would you say to our viewers? What would be the red flags, the green flags?
Mm. I think the majority of it will be very personal, because I think some people's red flags could be nothing to other people, you know. And the same for green flags. Some people really value certain things, and for other people it doesn't really make a difference in their life. But I think there are certainly, you know, if we're talking about like abusive people, you know, that's like everyone would agree that that's abuse type thing. I think red flags would be when you're told not to speak about something, like when you're told don't say that, or don't talk about this thing that happened between us, like when you're being shut down verbally, that's a red flag. Like you should have a sovereignty to talk about whatever you deem important to talk about, to anyone. And so I think that's a really big red flag. And I
Or
think
do
when you
them
start,
doing something to you and then them telling you, don't tell anyone. I'm a really
yeah,
good person and no one will believe you. That's a red flag. I've had that
yeah.
happen to me before. Yeah.
I had it happen, like my abusive relationship. I wasn't actually allowed to talk about the relationship at all. I wasn't allowed to tell anyone that I'm with this person. So it had to be kept a secret. And of course, anything that was happening within the relationship, therefore, was never talked about to anyone. So I was kept, everything was hidden, and I was suffering on my own in silence, because I was told like, don't do it, don't talk about it. So that's a really huge thing. Um, and in terms of other red flags, it's really, I think it's so personal. But I think in general, if people don't take interest in you like at all, if they're being quite selfish, I think that's definitely a red flag. When they don't have, there's no consideration for you in their actions, in their decision making. It's like, why do you want to be with me at all if you're not going to put me into the picture at all, you know? So that's under question for sure as well, when people don't consider you in their decisions.
And what other red flags are there?
So yeah, I think one of them is, yeah, as I said, the when they prevent you from speaking like about certain things that are happening in the relationship, or about them, like don't talk about our relationship, don't talk about what happened. I think that's really bad, because that's secretive. I think basically it's like it's the same energy as possessiveness, where they treat you like you are their object. So they control what you say, they control what you wear, they control what you look like in general, like your hairstyles or your makeup. Like they say, don't do this, don't wear that, do wear that. Like that's a really like possessive characteristic, where
When you spend time with
they
them.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I lost a lot of friends with my first relationship, because he didn't want me to see them. So yeah, any kind of like, I don't like this, don't do that, and it's like categorical, no, not acceptable at all. And another red flag is within the dynamic, if you see like a decline in your mental health, in your physical health, and they don't take any accountability for it, they don't take any interest in that, and they don't try and help you resolve it. They just kind of almost like gaslight you into saying like it's all in your head, or it's all your issues, I've got nothing to do with it. Red flag for sure. Because I think in a relationship, you're in a partnership, like it's, there's two people, and both of them are putting in something into the relationship. Even if only one person is suffering, both people are responsible for it. Um, and also something I think is important is your own gut feeling. But the problem with that is when you have trauma, you don't trust yourself, and you sometimes need healthy people around you to guide you and to let you know like what's healthy, what's not healthy. But if you have a feeling, trust it. Like whether that feeling itself comes from trauma or not, it doesn't matter, because it's still your body talking to you, and it's so important to trust that. Um, yeah, and then I think the last thing was it's like when they start doing things in a relationship just to please you and to make you like them, and then they stop doing them as soon as they have you, you know, as soon as you end up in a relationship, like it all drops. And that's not good, because it's like they don't have their own self-motivation, and they do, it's essentially manipulation. That's what that is. It's a sign, symptom of manipulation if you like. So yeah, those are like the big ones that I can think of right now. But is there anything else you want to add, Erin, to the red flags?
Also, yes, looking at who their friends are, who they're spending time with. If their friends are shady, they may also be. And one of the best pieces of advice I've ever received is you were talking about going to people for advice.
Mm.
You can go to your family and you can go to your friends for advice, and they would give you the best advice they possibly are capable of giving. However, if they don't have experience with it, or they may be struggling in relationships or need to become healthier themselves, they may not know. And the
Yeah.
best advice I was given was not to necessarily go to your friends and family, to go to people who have what you want. So if
Yeah.
you want to become the best firefighter, you go to someone who's a great firefighter. If you want to have the best marriage you possibly can, you go to someone who has a very good, healthy relationship, a very good marriage, right? If you want to have healthy relationships, you go to people who have healthy relationships.
Yeah. Not necessarily even therapists who know about relationships, because they might have a terrible relationship themselves.
Right. Behind the closed doors, you don't know what's happening. So it's really important to go to people that you know that have that healthy relationship, that you look and you go, yep, that's healthy. Yep, they've experienced life. They may know what they're talking about. Do you
Yeah, like
trust
that's
those
what I
people?
want.
Yeah. And do you trust these people? Can you sit down and talk to them and you listen to them and you trust them? Then those are the people you go to. Those are your people. Okay.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, yeah. And what about some green flags? What would you say are the green flags?
Respect is huge. Women, we need to be respected. We need to be cherished and we need to be loved. And same with the men. This is what we deserve. We don't deserve anything less. And don't think you don't, because you do. What does respect look like? You should be cherished. You should be honored. You should be loved. And no one is perfect, but the person needs to respect and accept all of you, all parts of you. And relationships take time to really get to know the person, ins and outs. Look at them in all different situations. Spend time with their family, spend time with their friends. Do all kinds of activities, all types of environments with them. Watch them when they become angry. And how do they treat other people? How do they treat other women? How do they treat other men? Do they have close relationships with the opposite sex? And how do they treat them? How do they treat their parents? How do they treat people who may be struggling? So if they are kind and compassionate to people, say maybe with Down syndrome, or the homeless, or children, that's starting to show you their heart. How is their patience? Are they a patient person? Because patience is huge. Are they on their own healing journey? Do they have self-awareness? Do they have accountability? Will they own up to their mistakes and accept their mistakes and apologize when they make a mistake? These are all really important things where they really sit down and listen to you and hear you out and try and understand you and empathize with you. Compassion is so important. Marija, would you find that there are any green flags you'd like to name?
I think kind of in terms of a lot of what you said, I think what is really about self-awareness, like as a trait, like that's what people should look out for, self-awareness, because even if they are maybe doing something right now that you could maybe think is like a red flag or something like that, but if they are aware that they're doing it and they say that I want to actively work on it and they're taking steps to work on it, that's a green flag. Because for me, I think that you know, some people, they have so much subconscious material that they don't even know is there, and then it erupts at very inappropriate times. But if a lot of the stuff is already conscious, it's present, and people are aware of it, like that's a much better place to be than having to face something that people didn't even know was there in the first place. So it's like, you know, I think with like certain maybe even mental health problems or behavioral problems, you know, that can be a really great flag if a person understands that's what's happening to them, and they're actively, proactively taking steps towards resolvement. And they're not blaming but not making excuses that like, oh, I have this mental condition, or this is my trauma, and that's why I am abusive, or that's why I am like that. That's a red flag. But if they say, this is what happened to me, and now it's my responsibility to change it, and they're doing it, I think that's one of the best people you can be with, because they're doing the work, and
Being
they're putting in
proactive.
the
Well said.
exactly, yeah, for themselves and for you, because
Yes.
they don't want you to see the worst sides of them. And so I think that's a really huge like show that they actually care about you. So yeah, I think that's probably
And it's
what I
also
would
though
call.
really important that they're doing it for themselves and they actually want
Exactly.
to receive the healing and have a better
Yeah.
quality of life.
Yeah, yeah. But sometimes people that we love, they can propel us to understand, actually, this is not a good thing that I have. So I think it's, as you say at the start, like we need relationships to heal. And I think that's one ways in which it happens when we get into a union and we see that our patterns are actually damaging for other people. And we want to change that, not just for them, but because we understand the impact of it. And that's our responsibility. So yeah.
And that we're maybe, yes, we're impacting them and we don't want to hurt them. So we want to
Exactly. Yeah.
make changes.
Exactly. Yeah. 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 Beautiful. Yeah.
And Maria, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I'd just like to mention that I'm starting to develop a program for specifically for women at the moment, to help them work through these toxic patterns or relationship issues. Maybe women who haven't had an example of a healthy relationship growing up, and they just don't have a blueprint for how it works. And I've called this program a sovereign woman. And because I think that's what I resonated with when I was in the trenches. And I still am to a certain degree, but I am so far away from where I was when I started doing all of this work. And it's starting to make so much more sense. And I start to feel more embodied in this work. And that's what I would like to help other women in a similar position to do, to feel themselves in their bodies, and to start to recognize, what is my compass, what is my direction in life, what do I want in relationships, not just I want to be chosen, but I want to choose. And that's what I would like to offer. And so if women resonate with this, and maybe they, you know, like this conversation and they found it helpful, I'd like to help them more. So if that's of interest, then do pre-sign up. It's on my website. I'll maybe link it down below in the comments, and just pre-sign up, and you will get all the information in the email when things start coming out. So yeah, that's the only thing I would like to add. But thank you so much for having me here. It was such a great conversation. So many nuggets of great wisdom from you, and just from the conversing itself. Like I think we've gained so much. It's been great.
Well, thank you so much for joining. It was an honor to have you. And thank you everyone for joining in. Next month, we're going to be having a special event throughout the month. We're going to be having it dedicated to divine mercy and compassion. Our first guest speaker is going to be Matt Kay. And we will be having expert guest speakers throughout the month talking about divine mercy and compassion and how it's so important to be compassionate and kind to others and ourselves.